So we're coming up on the top of the hour. I'd like to, he's been introducing himself as we go here, but I'd like to introduce Dave Burnison, who is a technical advocate for GitHub and Azure DevOps, or as we call it at GLG ADO, and which is kind of a funny name for it, given the ADO of many years ago. So Dave, please take it away with accelerating innovation with DevOps.
Awesome. Well, I am very excited to be here to talk to you today. A lot of times I'll talk with customers on this topic in more like 45 minutes or an hour. So buckle up. This is going to be a pretty fast ride through here talking about DevOps. So what are we going to talk about? Level set on what is DevOps, why does DevOps matter, talk about GitHub and Azure DevOps, and even more, things like Microsoft Teams and that, and give a quick demonstration of that. And then after the conference here, you'll be able to get the PDF of this presentation, because embedded in this presentation are lots of links and everything to hands-on labs and documentation and videos where you can dive in and learn more, and even links to how does Microsoft do DevOps. We're very transparent and open about how we approach DevOps these days, so you definitely can learn more there. So yeah, let's dive right in here. So what I always say is, or what I've heard others say, I shouldn't take credit for this, is if you ask 10 people to define DevOps, you're probably going to get 12 different responses. So I like to level set on the working definition of DevOps that we use here at Microsoft. And that's DevOps is the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to your end users. And so when we look at the software development cycle, we're looking at starting out with planning and tracking, writing the code, running your unit tests, doing your code reviews, building and testing, deploying, operate, collecting telemetry and things from even production so that we can monitor and learn, and even trying to take a zero distance approach to our customers, providing feedback mechanisms for our customers so that we can learn, are the things that we're creating actually valuable to them and everything. Just a couple of things to point out here, and that is, the first thing we talk about here is people. Culture is incredibly important. What I like to say is you want to get everybody in the same boat, rowing in the same direction. And that's everything from your program managers, engineering leads, engineers, testers, operations, site reliability engineering. And you want to get them to focus on delivering that value to end users. We don't want to just be sitting in the ivory tower thinking we know what's best for our customers. You want to ensure that what you're building is actually making your customers' lives easier and better and more able to get their work done and things. So, and let me just give me a second here just to arrange my screen so that I can get to the controls here. There we go. Great, now I can move on. So why does this matter? Just a couple of points here. This isn't just Microsoft or GitHub saying, you should be thinking about DevOps. For a number of years now, DORA, the DevOps Research and Assessment Organization, has been conducting the State of DevOps report. They'll send out questionnaires to, really every role, operations, developers, project managers, et cetera, and ask them, are you automating things? What process are you using? And things like that. How do your teams interact and things like that? And then they're able to classify their users, or able to classify companies into low performing, medium performing, and high performing DevOps organizations. And what they found is the top performers are spending more time on innovating and less time on keeping the lights on. In other words, shifting this time that's spent on security issues, defects, and customer support work over to new work. And this then results in better products delivered faster to happier customers by more engaged teams. And if you're new to DevOps, or even if you're not new to DevOps, definitely encourage you to read the book Accelerate This, The Science of DevOps. So the survey even goes beyond just kind of the back office efficiency of the software development teams themselves, but what's the impact of DevOps on the bottom line? So when we look at things like profitability, market share, and productivity, it was found that high performers are twice as likely to exceed these goals as low performers. So DevOps is really hitting the bottom line. And kind of skipping ahead here, we look at some of these companies like Uber, Airbnb, Netflix, et cetera. These have been the industry disruptors, right? Blockbuster was nice and fat and happy, and then along came Netflix. And part of their success can be attributed to what they've done with DevOps, shipping faster and experimenting to learn, iterate quickly, push new code confidently and securely, growing development teams, collaborate through InnerSource and things like that. So when you look at your company and your customers' companies, if you're in a consulting role and things like that, you want to challenge your challenge leadership and say, do you want to be Blockbuster or do you want to be Netflix? If you want to be Netflix, you would really want to think about, becoming a high-performing software, a high-performing DevOps company. And the way I put it is, DevOps is to software development what the assembly line is to automobile manufacturing. But it's even more. It's also the logistics that deliver the vehicles to end users, like the delivery logistics get vehicles to dealers, right? So it's distributing the software and everything, as well as just designing it and building it and everything. So what does this mean for you? If you set up a secure, efficient, robust, resilient assembly line, you will innovate faster than your competition. And this is related to all roles: project managers, business analysts, QA, project leads, developers, IT, operations. Everybody plays a role in designing and building and improving and distributing software. So when we look at DevOps, I had that circle before that started with planning and tracking and went all the way through to monitor and learn and everything. So if we start to talk about, from a tooling perspective, what does this mean? You want to talk about the tools for planning and tracking, the tools for development, build and deployment, manual test coverage, and even more. But when we look at the offerings today, from Microsoft, and we'll talk about how these can work with other tools as well. We've got Azure Boards for planning and tracking, GitHub for source control management and package management, build and deploy. You've got Azure Pipelines and GitHub Actions. For tracking those manual tests, you've got Azure Test Plans. And today it's really a better together story between GitHub and Azure DevOps. By putting your source code in GitHub, you can take advantage of a lot of the features that are now native to GitHub. GitHub is the home of open source. So that's where TensorFlow and Kubernetes and GraphQL and thousands of other open source projects live. And what we've learned from open source is great ways to collaborate. And so the phrase InnerSource has been coined to mean taking those open source principles and bringing them inside of your organization. For an organization like Microsoft, if you think about it, you've got the Office team, the developer division, you've got Bing, you've got Xbox, and even all of these teams are on a path now to adopt GitHub internally. And we can collaborate across teams by taking that open source mindset and bringing that internally, sharing code changes and everything across, sharing code changes across teams and contributing to, yeah, I want to make sure I can see the chat window there. There we go. Sharing code across teams without having to put it out there in the public space and things like that. And also, it's very likely to, if you've got new developers coming on board, chances are they're more familiar with GitHub than they are with Azure DevOps. So those developers can get up to speed very quickly. Now, things that have been added to GitHub just within the last couple of years or so: security features, dependency update, looking at all of that open source you're pulling in through NPM, NuGet, Maven, etc., and seeing, are there known security vulnerabilities in the versions of those packages that you're pulling in, being able to see that across all the repositories in my organization, and then taking it to code scanning, being able to query the code that you write for patterns of code that lead to security vulnerabilities, and then ensuring that you're not checking in any secrets. And if, actually I need to update that. That's now 35 different providers, whether it's Azure, Azure DevOps, Atlassian, Amazon Web Services, Datadog. We look for patterns of items that match logins and passwords and personal access tokens and other forms of credentials from those providers. And if that's in a public repository, we can reach out to those providers and say, hey, this secret was just exposed. Let's roll that or invalidate that secret to make sure that a bad actor is not going to take that and log in and get access to your stuff. And code scanning in particular, we've taken that open source mindset. So there's over 2,000 CodeQL queries that run when code scanning runs. And it started out with queries that were created by GitHub's security team. We acquired a company called Semel that became part of GitHub, and they wrote thousands of queries. But then that open source nature comes in. So now there's queries that have been written by Microsoft, Google, other companies that have security researchers on staff. So you can leverage the work of those security researchers, but you can even dig in and learn how to write CodeQL queries yourself, and to look for certain patterns of code and everything. And a big thing that we're doing here with this is, you probably know, the further through the pipeline you get and where a security issue is found, it can be more and more costly to fix. And there's a lot of tools that can plug into your build systems, but every time you create a repository, you have to make sure that those steps are added to the build systems. But with CodeQL, this is hooked right into the repository. So as soon as code is pushed to GitHub, or as soon as pull request is created, it's right inside that developer workflow where you're doing all of these security checks. And then again, with that open source nature that we've pulled in, you're leveraging the work of security experts from customers or from companies like Microsoft, Google, Uber, and many others. So that's one of the advantages of using GitHub with Azure boards and Azure pipelines and things like that. Now, something else that's in beta today is CodeSpaces. CodeSpaces is Visual Studio Code running inside of the browser. Now, the way this is wired into GitHub is that you access this right from your GitHub repo. So as soon as this spins up, it's in the context of the branch that you're working on. It's also in the context of you as a developer. So it knows the Visual Studio Code extensions that you like to work with. And that may be different than your colleague and everything. I'm gonna keep going on here. I hope to spend as much time as I can in the demo and touch on all of these. Automated delivery. Now, with the GitHub and Azure DevOps teams coming together under the GitHub leadership, we've been able to take the DNA from Azure DevOps and bring that over to GitHub. And one example here is for GitHub Actions, we took a fork of the Azure Pipelines code and brought that over to GitHub. Now, GitHub being a different ecosystem, we weren't able to just light up all of the features right away. But so initially, GitHub Actions was seen as a great continuous integration or CI tool. So for your builds and unit tests and everything. But it took about a year before we were able to light up some of the continuous delivery features, such as being able to have multiple stages in a single workflow. So to go from your build to deploying to dev, to deploying to QA, to deploying to production. But also, you don't want to just continually deploy all at once. You want to have manual approval checks in between there. So that new code sitting in QA, and you want to say, hey, it's only our director of QA or somebody from the QA leadership team that can approve that this deployment is ready to go to production and things like that. So now, and those features were added this past December in beta and are actually going GA. So now GitHub Actions is also a great continuous delivery tool. GitHub Mobile, being able to access all the goodness of GitHub right from your phone or tablet. By the way, last I checked, which earlier this week, that's #1 in developer tools in the Apple App Store. Also out there for the Android devices as well. Let me kind of skip ahead here. So when we talk about some of the things that Azure DevOps brings to the table, Azure boards, being able to plan and track your work. And so, a couple of key things there. You probably have a hierarchy of epics, features, user stories, tasks. You also want to be able to track your bugs and everything. And you want to tie that directly to the code changes that are completing those tasks or completing those bug fixes and everything. And that's where the integration with Azure DevOps and GitHub comes into play. Just by referencing a task, bug, user story in my commit messages or pull requests and things like that, I create a deep link between GitHub and Azure boards, and that flows through to the deployments so that I can see exactly which user stories are sitting in QA and ready for manual testing and everything. So, be able to track that work and everything. Azure Pipelines, that has become a great CI/CD tool, well recognized by Gartner and Forrester and other research firms like that. If you're a company that's using Azure DevOps today and you have an investment in Azure Pipelines, there's no pressure to move over to GitHub Actions or anything like that. You can continue to integrate Azure Pipelines with GitHub so that you can take advantage of all those security features, but leverage those investments that you've made in Azure Pipelines and leverage the things like centrally managed templates to ensure that all of your teams are plugging in the right tasks for whether it's additional security checks, or maybe you've got tasks in there that verify your Azure Resource Manager templates before they're used for provisioning databases and app services or Kubernetes or whatever it may be, kind of a thing. And that is also tightly integrated with GitHub. So right from my pipelines, I can see what GitHub repo did it come from, what branch did it come from, and all of that, and tie that back to the user stories and everything. So GitHub Actions and Azure Pipelines have facilities for managing automated tests, but not everything can be automated. So managing those manual test plans and ensuring that, hey, we want to test this out in the users using the Edge browser, or We want to test it out for users that are using Safari on Mac or whatever. So you want to run through those same test plans in multiple configurations and things. Azure Test Plans is a great tool for managing all of that and tying test plans directly to your requirements and user stories and such. And then for pulling it all together, regardless of what teams you're using, both GitHub and Azure DevOps have been architected in a way that if you're using Jenkins for build, or you're using Sonar Cloud for analyzing the code for different code smells and things like that, and it doesn't matter. Just because it's called Azure DevOps, you can deploy to Azure, you can deploy to AWS, you can deploy internally to your on-premise environments and all that. Teams is a great way to pull that all together as your DevOps hub. So as a developer, as a project manager, as a program manager, all I need to know where to go is to go to my Teams channel. From there, I can access everything else. I don't need to keep half a dozen different favorites to get to everything. So let's dive into a demo on all of this. So let me
Dave, I just want to let you know, as you start the demo, we've got 5 minutes remaining on the session, but we're getting 7 minutes added to us. So
that's awesome.
So let's get into the demo, and maybe if you want to take questions at the end, let me know.
Absolutely. All right, so let me just bring up the right window here, and then I'll pull it over to the main screen. All right, so this is Parts Unlimited here, and let me see, where is my... Well, I'll start out here. So I've got Parts Unlimited team set up here with multiple channels, and I've got a channel here for development. So I can see all of the activity that's going on in Azure DevOps and GitHub, and I can see and I can interact right from here. I can comment on, you know, the files that were updated as part of this pull request and things. So or I can see my Azure DevOps dashboard where, oh, come on, load dashboard. There we go. You know, I can see my Azure DevOps dashboard where I can, you know, monitor everything that's going on, whether it's my burn down chart or the work just for me. I can see what's going on with my builds and deployments and everything here. I can access, you know, I can put links in here to show my my GitHub repo, and even here we're seeing the security vulnerability scanning that comes from Dependabot, saying that, hey, you've got a vulnerability in one of the open source packages that you're pulling in. But I can couple this with things like my Azure resources that we're deploying to. So, you know, again, I don't have to keep favorites for Azure DevOps and GitHub and Azure. You know, here's the app services and databases and things that we're deploying to. Maybe we're creating some additional Power BI reports or something else related to our solution. I can put all of that under the umbrella of Microsoft Teams here and get access to everything. But what if I'm operations or a site reliability engineer? We can set up a separate view, a separate channel for them, because they're going to be interested in things like, hey, what is this solution costing us on Azure? So plug right into the cost analysis and everything and see what's the trend for the month. What's this going to cost us? Or another example might be, maybe there's a, you know, we want to look at the monitoring and telemetry coming from Azure Monitor and Application Insights. But if you're using New Relic or Datadog or something else, you could easily plug in, you know, that URL and that website right here. So this becomes our entire DevOps hub. Now I know I've only got a couple of minutes here. Let me show a couple of other things. If I dive into my Kanban board for tracking all of my work here, and I'm actually, as soon as this loads, I want to, where's my little guy? Well, I'm going to bring this up. There should be a button here that I can jump into the full website. Not seeing that. I'm probably just under time pressure here, but like I mentioned, as I'm tracking all of my work, I can tie things in between GitHub and Azure DevOps. So we created, or we made code changes to make changes for this particular requirement, and we were able to tie it into the changes that actually occurred in our code. And a couple of things I want to point out here. I talked about all those security features and everything. The way this works and the way it runs, this ends up right inside the developer workflow, right? We don't have to wait for our security team to tell us, hey, you've got security vulnerabilities. Here's a file that I changed, and CodeQL told me, hey, you've got this missing cross-site scripting validation error. And so as a developer, I can dive into this and learn more about this and even get a recommendation. It's telling me, hey, you're using HTTP post here, but if we look at the example code, it's saying I also should be adding in this validate anti-forgery token. As a developer, that's just not something maybe I was aware of. And so I'm kind of learning as I go. But all this security stuff is, yes, right here in my face. Or if I go back and look at, here's that dependabot warning about my version of Bootstrap that I'm using that's out of date. Dependabot's even smart enough that it can go ahead and create a pull request and say, we know exactly we know exactly what the change is and what we need to do. And because we're doing this through a pull request, it's going to run all of the GitHub actions that are going to run my build, my unit tests. In my case, I'm using Azure Resource Manager templates to provision everything. And I can run a check to make sure that the syntax is correct in that Resource Manager template before using it and everything. So we're tying this all together. Okay, Chris, I'm seeing, can we continue here for questions and everything?
So we have another 5 minutes or so. If anybody's got questions for Dave, if you want to hit them through the chat.
So real quick, actually, let me just skip ahead here since we're almost at time. Inside of my presentation that you'll get, tons of resources in here. And it's things like GitHub Universe. We had lots of videos, past sessions on different areas of GitHub, whether it's actions or security. The book Accelerate. Microsoft Learn is your free resource for hands-on labs for learning all about Azure and Azure DevOps and GitHub.